Welcome to War Stories and Fairy Tales. I'm Scott, I'm your layman, and this is our history of war. And today we're doing another battlefield tour. We're at the Point Park Military Park, the site of the Battle of Lookout Mountain, which was one of the two battles that we call the Campaign for Chattanooga. This is a painting commissioned by General Joseph Hooker, who was the commander of Union forces in the assault on Lookout Mountain here, what they called the Battle Above the Clouds. You can see Union troops forming up here in the bottom. A little bit farther up, you can see a demonstration. You'll notice they're kind of marching and galloping across the field without shooting. So that's a little bit of a demonstration toward the positions at the base of the ridge. If you look up above that, you see the actual assault where Union troops are climbing up the mountain and they're now shooting up there. You can see the low-level clouds. This is the 24th of November, so it would have been cold and cloudy and a little yucky. But yeah, this is why it's called the Battle Above the Clouds, because the guys at the peak of Lookout Mountain couldn't see what was going on down below that cloud layer. So they weren't able to support their guys farther down the mountain. And as the Union climbed up higher and higher, obviously the climb became more difficult, but the fighting would have gotten easier. They never did actually occupy the very top of the mountain. The Confederate troops up there were able to hold their positions until dark and then evacuate. So they didn't capture those positions up there, but they did get high enough up the mountain that those positions became what we call untenable. So there was no point in them staying up there. And that's how Joe Hooker captured Lookout Mountain. Chattanooga Campaign, Day 1. This is the Battle of Lookout Mountain, 24th of November, 1863. So, when we finished up the Battle of Chickamauga, we saw that Rosecrans and the Army of the Cumberland had managed to retreat from Chickamauga Creek up into Chattanooga. Chickamauga is down this way. So they had retreated up this way and gotten back to Chickamauga. Bragg had brought his Army of Tennessee in and laid siege to them. The Confederates have troops dug in along Missionary Ridge here, and they have a position, an artillery and observation position up here on Lookout Mountain. Now, Lookout Mountain is where the action is going to be today. So this is the highest terrain in this area. It's something like 2,800 feet high, which if you're accustomed to mountains like the Rocky Mountains and that kind of thing, 2,800 feet doesn't sound like much. But from a position at the top of this hill, you can see everything. You can see all of this valley here. You can see all up and down the Tennessee River. This bend right here is called Moccasin Bend. You can see the whole thing. And even more important than that, with artillery up here, you can sink anything that comes around that bend. Because when a boat tries to come around this bend, it's got to slow down. And when it slows down, it becomes a very good artillery target. Now, Stevenson's guns can range everything here. They can probably range a little bit of Chattanooga. That's not as big of a threat because once you know what your enemy can range, you can move everything out of that area so he can't really hurt you. But he can see what's going on. He can certainly hit anything that comes around Moccasin Bend. He can threaten any rail traffic that comes in from Vicksburg or from the west and comes around Moccasin Bend. And more importantly, he can see everything that goes on in this valley. And he can relay what's going on by use of semaphore flags during the day or flares at night. He can make sure Bragg knows everything that's going on down here so that if he needs to, he can flex his guys that are here along Missionary Ridge to deal with whatever's happening. On the Union side, Ulysses S. Grant is now in charge of the entire Western Department. George Thomas, who you'll remember as the Rock of Chickamauga, has been promoted to a corps commander. William Rosecrans is out of the picture. He was pretty much done after Chickamauga. So he is no longer commanding in this area. You've also got William Tecumseh Sherman, who has come into Chattanooga with Grant to try and break this siege. Once they break this siege, you can see the railroads. You got a railroad leading off toward Richmond that way and another one leading down toward Atlanta that way. So from Chattanooga, the way is open for the Union to invade the South. And that's what's going to happen, spoiler alert, after this battle. So Sherman is going to start his famous invasion after this battle. But on November 24th, 1863, that invasion hasn't started yet. We're still trying to secure Chattanooga. Joe Hooker has come in overland by this railroad, and his first mission is going to be to clear the Confederates off of Lookout Mountain and seize that mountain so they can't threaten traffic on the river or on the railroad anymore. So, the 24th of November, 1863, is the Battle of Lookout Mountain, the battle above the clouds. It's a cold day. It's a nasty day. The cloud layer is hanging about halfway down the mountain. So the guys at the bottom can't see what's going on at the top. The guys at the top can't see what's going on down at the bottom. So Hooker is going to send his guys up. First, he's going to do what we call a demonstration. A demonstration is a military maneuver that its purpose is to get the enemy's attention, get them looking where you want them to look, because they're thinking your demonstration is where your attack is coming from. So you want them paying attention over here. Meanwhile, he's sending troops up the side of the mountain over here to take it. Now, most of the Confederate positions are going to be down low on the mountain. The artillery really can't threaten them today because they're above the clouds. They can't see anything. So most of the positions they're going to be dealing with are along the side of the mountain here. Now, Lookout Mountain is steep, really steep. You're going to get to see when we actually get to the battlefield. It's very steep. It's a tough climb, even if there aren't enemy above you shooting at you. But they're going to come around and they're going to start their way up the mountain. Most of the fighting is on this western slope here. The Union never does actually make it. They never do actually engage the Confederate units that are up at the top of the mountain. By the time they get about halfway up, Stevenson decides his position is untenable. He can't hold it anymore. So he's going to bug out in the night under cover of darkness and head back to Missionary Ridge. And Hooker, his troops, are going to make it to the top of the mountain, but not until after Stevenson is bugged out. And that's where things stand at nightfall on the 24th of November. Hooker sends word back to Grant that he has Lookout Mountain, and that frees Grant to start the next phase of his plan on the 25th. So from here you can get a little bit of a sense of why this position was so important to the defense and the ultimate control of Chattanooga. With guns up on this mountain, not only can you control this bend in the river, you can also range a little part of the town, enough to scare people, not enough to really do much damage, because pretty soon they'll figure out what you can hit and what you can't and move things away from the stuff you can hit. But if you have guns up here, you can certainly scare people down there. And if you look out there in the distance, there's a piece of high ground. I'm not sure you can see it in the video with the clouds the way they are, but that's Missionary Ridge over there, where the actual decisive battle for Chattanooga happened on the 25th of November. All the action on Lookout Mountain took place on the 24th of November of 1863. Over there, Grant and Sherman and Thomas and Hooker would all converge on that Confederate position over there and finally knock the Confederates off of the high ground around Chattanooga. And from here, you can get a sense of what it might have been like for the Union infantry to try and climb up this hill to attack the Confederates that were up here. This is a steep mountain, and it's pretty high. This mountain is something like 2,800 feet high at the peak. That's a tough climb. The Confederates would have had layered defenses. So not only would they have had gun batteries up here, but there would have been fighting positions on the slope where you might have dead space from the positions below. Dead space is anything you can't see from where you are. From here, for example, if this vegetation was all cleared off, we would be able to see 50 to 100 yards before the slope kind of drops off. So you would want another position at that point where the slope drops off. So this is the site of a Confederate artillery battery that would have commanded a large portion of the advance up this mountain. You can see these guns can't be depressed much more than they are. So you can't actually shoot down the hill, which is why you've got to have defenses in depth, layered defenses. You've got to have infantry down below on the actual slope of the hill. But if you look down there into that clear area where you can see some kind of a monument down there, these guns definitely would have been able to range that monument down there, which means, and that monument is in a flat area that would have been a great place for Union troops to rest and reform after doing the first part of the climb, which means if you made the mistake of stopping in that flat space down there, these guns were going to hit you. This is the extreme northern end of the peak of Lookout Mountain. And this is an even better vantage point to show why this mountain was important to control of Chattanooga. So this bend in the Tennessee River that you see behind me, this is called Moccasin Bend. Any boat coming up the river or down the river has to pass around this bend. And it's going to have to slow down to do that. And when it slows down, it becomes a very good target for artillery. And if it's not a friendly boat, you're going to be able to range it and sink it. Not only that, but you can see everything that goes on in the Tennessee Valley for miles around from this point. And you can send signals to your buddies who are down there getting ready to move and tell them where they need to go and what they need to do when they get there. They used signal flags and they used flares at night to convey messages to any troops that might have been down in the valley to explain to them what the situation was and what they needed to go do. And you can also see from here, those are obviously the modern rail lines, but that rail yard is in more or less the same place that the rail yard would have been in 1863. And then this is something kind of interesting. In the years after the Civil War, and basically anytime you see a photograph of a guy standing on Lookout Mountain with the river behind him, he's standing on that rock right there because it's one of the most picturesque views around. We're no longer allowed to go out there because too many people didn't pay attention and fell off the rock. But a lot of historic photos of people standing on Lookout Mountain, that's where they were standing. Day 2 of the Chattanooga campaign. This is the Battle of Missionary Ridge. Just to bring you back up to speed, yesterday on the 24th of November, Joe Hooker took Lookout Mountain, knocked the Confederates off of the top of the mountain. Stevenson, who was the commander of the unit up there, decided that his position was untenable, made his way back down the mountain. So now, Lookout Mountain is cleared. Those guns can no longer threaten the river. The observers up there can no longer send word to Bragg about what's going on in Chattanooga or in the valley. So Grant is free to start the next phase of his campaign. So the next phase of Grant's operation is to knock the Confederates off of Missionary Ridge. That's going to allow him to start staging troops in Chattanooga and getting ready to invade the South. What happens today is going to be setting up for that. The first phase of the plan is for William Tecumseh Sherman to push across the river from up here, attack Bragg's right flank on Missionary Ridge up here. So you have two hills right here that the railroad cuts through. So you've got up here at the north on the river is called Billy Goat Hill, and down here on the south side of the railroad is called Tunnel Hill, creatively named because there's a railroad tunnel there. Sherman comes across the river and hits Bragg's right flank here at Tunnel Hill. Now, Sherman may have been working with bad intel, may have simply misjudged where Bragg's position was, or it may be that Bragg's position was stronger than Sherman expected, because Sherman's attack bogs down here. Now, it's challenging attacking uphill against a prepared enemy. Remember, these guys have been there for weeks, right? They've been there since late September. So they've had plenty of time to reinforce their positions, to dig in, to really get good defensive positions set up. So Sherman, working his way around, he's trying to find the flank, but he can't find the flank and he can't break the line. The idea is, if he can break the line, roll up the flank, he can knock Bragg right off of Missionary Ridge, just fighting his way down like that. But he can't break the flank. He can't get through up here. So Grant sends George Thomas in with what he expects to be a supporting attack. So the Confederates have rifle pits dug in all along the foot of Missionary Ridge here. Rifle pits in the Civil War are basically what we would call foxholes today. So he's got holes dug all along the base of Missionary Ridge, and Thomas's job is to hit those holes, those rifle pits, and keep them busy, take the rifle pits, but not to advance up the mountain. Well, that's not exactly how it works out. Thomas's guys, they take the rifle pits and they decide whether, and it's not clear to me whether Thomas gave this order or they just decided this on their own, but they start marching up the hill. And there's a guy who's part of this attack whose name you may not have heard, but you have definitely heard his son's name, called Arthur MacArthur. This is the father of Douglas MacArthur, the famous World War II general. Arthur MacArthur grabbed his regiment's colors and started walking up the hill. So the colors are an important thing to the regiment. Not only is that the visual representation of where the regiment is, guys look to the colors to see which direction they're supposed to go. And they look to the colors to see where they're supposed to set up. And frankly, they look to the colors to see whether or not they're still standing. The colors fall, then a lot of time that's a pretty good message to the guys that, hey, we need to bug out and get out of here. Or there's something seriously wrong and we need to get our colors back. So Thomas is pushing up Missionary Ridge with Arthur MacArthur in the lead. He pushes up and his attack goes surprisingly well. And we talked yesterday in Lookout Mountain about how difficult it is to assault a position, a prepared position uphill. But it's working for Thomas. So these guys are starting to crumble up here. These guys are still holding pretty firm against Sherman, but these guys are starting to crumble. And the lines here are starting to crumble. So Joe Hooker, who was already not real keen on being left out of this fight, he leads his guys down off of the mountain, maybe with orders, maybe not, comes across the valley and starts hitting them from the left flank. And his attack goes a lot better than Sherman's. So between Thomas and Hooker, so the Confederate defense just melts away. They pull down off of Missionary Ridge. And Bragg, of course, bugs out. And by the end of the day, on the 25th of November, 1863, Union forces are in possession of Missionary Ridge. And the siege of Chattanooga is broken, and Grant is free to start bringing troops in and begin planning his invasion of the South. So it's really, with the light the way it is, it's hard to see Missionary Ridge over on the other side of the valley. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about it anyway, because that's where the decisive part of this battle happened. It really hasn't, the battlefield hasn't been preserved over there, but we're going to see what we can do from here. So the Union took Lookout Mountain on the 24th of November, 1863. So Grant was in charge of this entire theater of operations by November. And on the 25th, he had General Sherman, General Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga, and General Hooker, who had just taken Lookout Mountain on the 24th, and all three of them went against the Confederate positions on the top of Missionary Ridge over there. Sherman started the fight in the morning by attacking the northern end of the line. And if you can see, there's a saddle over there that you can just barely see, and the hill on the north side of it is called Tunnel Mountain. That's a very creative name because there was a railroad tunnel going through that saddle that you can just barely see from here. Sherman's job was to swing around and hit Bragg's line from the north, try to find his flank and roll him up. Well, Sherman either had bad intel or he didn't know exactly where the end of Bragg's line was, because he ended up, rather than attacking the flank, he ended up attacking prepared positions, fighting uphill, which is never a great position to be in. So he was bogged down there at the north end of the line. So sometime late in the morning, Grant sent Thomas forward against the center of Bragg's line. Right there, you can see lots of houses on the ridge over there at where the center of Bragg's line would have been. Now, Thomas's mission was to attack the rifle pits at the base of the ridge. His job was to get Bragg's attention and get him to commit troops to his center so that Sherman could break his northern flank. Well, Thomas's troops, whether Thomas ordered them to do this or not, they got to the base of the ridge and they took out the Confederate rifle pits there, and they just kept going. And there was one guy there whose name you might know. And if you don't know his name, you know his son's name. This guy's name was Arthur MacArthur. His son was Douglas MacArthur. And Arthur MacArthur, in the assault on Missionary Ridge, grabbed his regiment's colors and started walking up the hill. Well, the colors were how a regiment knew what was going on in a fight. That was, you can't hear anything. You can't hear orders because the noise of rifles and cannons all around you has torn up your ears. Even if it's not going on right now, you really can't understand what's going on in terms of just listening. But you can look at the colors and see which direction they're moving, and you can follow them. So when Arthur MacArthur grabbed the colors and started walking up the hill, the regiment followed. And when that happened, the regiments to their left and right also followed. Because, hey, somebody's having some success. They're moving forward. We might as well follow them. They made it all the way up the hill, and they knocked the Confederates off of their positions at the center of that hill. Sherman's still having trouble on the right flank, but now the center is broken. Kind of the opposite of what the Confederates did to the Union lines down at Chickamauga. At about that same time, Hooker came down off of Lookout Mountain, marched across the valley that you can see over there, and hit Bragg from the south. And basically just marched up the ridge line, met very little resistance, and kept going. So by late in the afternoon of the 25th of November, the rebels were completely routed off of Missionary Ridge. And with control of Lookout Mountain on this side and Missionary Ridge on that side, the Union now had everything they needed to secure Chattanooga, to keep it a Union asset. And now they had railroads going off that way and off that way. They had railroad access to basically every part of the Confederacy east of the Mississippi. Made moving around from here into the deep south much easier. And that's exactly what happened. Sometime later, Sherman got his army together and they started marching that way, more or less. This was the start. Right here is the start of Sherman's famous March to the Sea. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this war story, please share the video. Please like, please subscribe. Please make a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. Until next time, I'm Scott, reminding you to piss when you can. Have a good one.